Hello, friend. In this video, we're going to be breaking down a bit of an interview that John Mayer had, or I think it was technically a sort of a mastermind type thing with a college class or something like that. But regardless, it's on video. It's something good for us to break down. I think there's a lot of good information in this, even though it's not very long. John Mayer's, I think, done a really great job, especially in recent years, of actually being very sharing of like his knowledge and songwriting and things like that, where a lot of songwriters tend to be kind of hush-hush about it, or maybe they just don't have people asking them the right questions, or they don't have enough people asking them questions. But regardless, John Mayer's been pretty giving in that department for a while now, so let's take a look.
What's your process when writing songs?
So it's like matching socks. One sock is the music, one sock is the lyric, and not just the lyric, but the lyric and the concept, right? Which is, I guess, still the lyric. Words and music. Music is very easy to come up with. Words are harder to come up with. And coming up with words and music that match each other are very, very difficult.
First of all, the sock analogy. It's a good analogy, but I think we have to think about really what he's saying here. If what you're picturing is, I go out and I buy a set of 3 pairs of socks and now I have to like match them back up. No, that's not what this analogy is, because in that analogy, you already know that each one does have a match because you bought them as a pair. But for songwriting, that doesn't exist, right? When you're coming up with music, there is no guarantee that you already have a lyrical idea that's going to match up with that. So instead, it's like having a large bin of socks that are all like, I don't know, people who only had one sock and they throw it in this bin. In that analogy, if you only have 3 socks, the probability that you have a pair is very low. The probability that you have 2 blue socks that are the same shade, or at least close, and are the same, height and the same general size is extremely low. But if you have a bin of 300 socks, now all of a sudden it's like, wow, I mean, how many different sock colors are there? Especially if we're talking like guy socks, just to keep it really simple. With female socks, it seems to be a lot more. But for guy socks, what is there? There's like blue, gray, black, and white. To my knowledge anyway, that's basically it. In that circumstance, if you have a whole bunch of different socks, the probability that you can actually find some to match up is way higher. So I agree with him totally, and this has probably been your experience as well, that music is way easier to come up with. I joke I'm jealous of my friends that only do music. I'm like, man, I would write a song a day if I only had to write music. It's the lyrics that's usually the very difficult part. Something that can be very helpful is keeping a pool of your lyrical ideas, whether that's just, sort of to his point, he talks about like, well, lyrics and concept, and I don't remember if he uses the term theme or not. Ultimately, having a list, a pool, a document, an idea document, as I call it, that literally just is any and all ideas you get, whether that's a single line of a lyric, a song title idea, an idea that's literally just a concept where you're like, well, what about a song that like plays with this idea? Doesn't matter what it is. Write it in that document. That way, when you are writing music, you can then look at that document. You already have a pool of possible options to match with the music that you're writing. And then another thing on this, I find that's way easier sometimes to, instead of going straight from music to lyrics, because sometimes it feels like that can be a bit of a stretch. I find it easier to go from music to finding pictures that evoke what that music feels like, because I think that's easier to do. And then from those pictures, figuring out, okay, what are the words, what are the lyrics that the song would be about? Because as they say, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So if that's true, every picture should be worth about 3 songs.
And in fact, it's so difficult that even if like I'm writing music these last weeks, I'm just a writer right now. I'm just sitting and writing. And I wrote a really good song 2 weeks ago. What I think is a really like A+ song. And as soon as you're done with the A+ song, you once again know nothing about it. You once again know nothing about writing. At the beginning of every song, you don't know anything. You're a baby, you're an infant. And for me, it is like being reincarnated every time as an infant. What is this song? Is this anything? So it's a very mathematical process, actually, of taking an idea, comparing it against, so taking a musical idea, comparing it with a verbal idea, a lyrical idea. And you keep going and you keep going and you go, that doesn't sound right. And then at some point you either have written something you sing, or a lot of times I'll just blurt something out.
Couple interesting points in there. He mentions the whole mathematical process. And I think that's a really good point. Something that I've found in, when you're teaching songwriting, you have to figure out a way to explain that which before you kind of just did. There are lots of things that I didn't necessarily think about how I did it, because I didn't have to think about it. But then when you teach it, you have to sit back and say, well, wait a second. How did I figure that out? So then that leads you to sort of creating processes. That way I can take what I do and make it so you can also do that same thing or a similar process to get similar results. And something that I find especially awesome about songwriting, I think I mentioned this in a podcast recently, but it's not like an assembly line, right? So for an assembly line, you're producing the same Honda Civic with that assembly line. You're effectively doing many steps to printing the same exact car over and over and over again. Songwriting can't be like that. So any process that we have is, to his point, somewhat mathematical, but it also has an element of it just is different every time. So we talked about, being an infant every time. I think really what he's communicating there is this idea that every song is still its own thing. And no matter what, as many songs as you've written, each one is so much its own beast that it almost feels like you're going back to knowing nothing again. And that speaks to the element of it that can never be fully mathematical and can never be fully process driven. So any process we come up with has to be fairly loose, honestly. I have a 6-step lyric writing checklist, link in the description if you want to check it out, that is trying to ride that line of, yeah, it's a process in steps, but it's not too stringent because at some point it would lose all creativity. We can't be an assembly line for songs. That's not how creativity works. But having some sort of process to be able to reliably get good results over and over again is good. So it's kind of this weird, somewhere in between math, science, and just pure creativity. And if you miss out on either half, you're missing out on a lot, because some people, I think, get too creative-y and they kind of lose out on the mathematical process, scientific element of it. The type of people who will be like, oh, I don't need music theory. And then the other half of people maybe get a little too scientific with it and start to lose track of the creative element.
I'll go, oh, that's a thing. And we just wait. You just wait and wait and wait. So for me, songwriting is I can always play music and I can always write lyrics. But to find the stuff that goes together and really, when the music sounds like the lyrics and the music and lyrics together sound like the idea, and the music and the lyrics and the idea sound like the singer, then you got a song. And I have been spending I'm going to let you in, I am a student forever. I've been trying all week. It's Thursday. I've been trying since Monday to write a song. Do you know how many songs I've gone through and ditched? Maybe 8. And I ditched them because the line that the chorus was supposed to end on wasn't good enough.
I find it interesting to hear him say that he's trashed 8 songs. What I always wonder when songwriters talk about that is, were those songs fully written? At what point did you abandon them? Because I feel like most songwriters that I at least hear talk about it are always talking about like, oh yeah, I wrote like 120 songs for the 12 that made this album. And my process has always been that as soon as I get the sense that this song is not going anywhere, and by going anywhere, I mean, let's say that I'm releasing, a 5-song EP in the next year, and I have 5 unreleased songs that currently I'm thinking are going to be on that EP. If I'm writing a song and I'm like, this is currently my 10th best unreleased song, there's no way that's going to make the cut for the EP. So I just abandon it because I just already know that's not going to be good enough to make the cut. But it's not really a fully finished song that I could then give to somebody else. So I always wonder when they talk about that, whether is that a full song, or is that like you had a chorus and you had most of the lyrics of the chorus and you kind of knew what the verse guitar riff was going to be or something, but you didn't really have any lyrics for it yet and you abandoned it at that point.
People on a trip, and then I threw them out of the car right before they were about to get to Disneyland. And just throw it out and try one, or keep editing or keep working with it, because I'm just going for the stuff that sounds believable. And that's the only thing that matters to me, is that if I'm going to do a song and it's me singing, oh, now it's singing, and this is the line that it's ending on, sounds like me. And it's got to be interesting. And just like there's color in music, there's color in lyrics. And if you have a really colorful sounding, track, and then your words are not really colorful, then it's not a great song.
I'm so glad he said that, because man, it gets really discouraging as a person who deeply cares about lyrics. The amount of people, including songwriters, that will say things that to me are ridiculous, like, it's a great song, I don't really care about lyrics. Like, well, if the lyrics suck, or if you didn't even put any effort into the lyrics, how can it possibly be a good song? That's like going to a movie and being like, oh wow, it was such a great movie, but yet you're like, yeah, but the characters and the plot and the entire story sucked. But the special effects were good. It sounded good. That's effectively the same thing because your entire story is within the lyric of the song. So it's always refreshing to hear people like John Mayer actually talk about like, no, lyrics do matter. If the lyrics suck, your song sucks. That's it.
Basically waiting for magic to happen. Just slugging away till magic happens, and then we take credit for it.
So overall, John Mayer sharing some good stuff in there. Hopefully you found it helpful as well. Another thing he mentioned in there that I didn't touch on the time that I think is really intriguing is when he talked about, throwing a song out versus possibly tinkering with it and editing it. And that to me is one of those difficult but necessary things to learn as any kind of writer, really, but especially as a songwriter, is trying to figure out which things are inherently broken and need to be thrown out versus which can be edited into being good. Because all writing starts as something that sucks. The question that you need to figure out is this something that has a diamond in it if I just refine it into that? Or is this something that is inherently broken and bad? Sometimes this happens in a song where you might write a second verse and you're editing it. You're doing maybe iterative lyric editing if you've downloaded my free guide on 6-step lyric writing process, and then you realize like, oh, I don't think I can edit this into being something good because inherently what this second verse has to say is not what the song needs. Let's say we have a 3-act structure in our song where the chorus, that's our theme, but our first verse, second verse, and bridge are the 3 acts of our story, essentially. So you need the first verse, the first act, to communicate something. You have your bridge, your third act, communicating something, and that requires your second verse, your second act, to fill in with the rest of the information that's needed or the plot point that is needed to finish out the story. And then you realize, oh, well, what I'm saying here is fundamentally not what the second verse needs to say. So it doesn't matter how good the lyrics are in and of themselves. What matters is in context of the song, are these lyrics telling the story that needs to be told in that second verse? So that's another interesting thing that sort of tucked into what he said, is knowing that line, right? Is this something that's inherently broken, or is this something that I can edit into something good? So anyway, hopefully this was helpful to you. John Mayer with some good stuff, even though that video is only like 3 minutes long, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And if you're curious on the 6-step lyric writing checklist that I alluded to or mentioned a couple of times, be sure to check it out. Totally free. Link in the description down below. Breaks down my process that I go through to really avoid the whole staring at a blank page and being like, all right, improvise poetry, because that's unreasonable to ask of ourselves. So instead, break it down into smaller baby steps that are more easily done. It has helped me to certainly level up my lyrics, and it, I'm sure, can help you level up yours as well. Be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next one.